The Hidden Torture, a lecture on targeted individuals by Peter K. Sharpen. Introduction. Who am I? Firstly, I must state that I am not a TI, a targeted individual. I am a mature male who has studied many academic subjects in a varied career, but qualified as a mature student to become a teacher of English. I also, however, became a qualified teacher of students with learning difficulties and special needs, and have taught both in the UK and Western Australia for many years. I am now retired. I am a writer, poet, graphic designer and self-taught musician. I am also a very practical person. What is my interest? About 15 years ago, I met a lovely lady. I have permission to call her Sally, which is not her real name, and we are still together. About 7 years ago, she began to exhibit increasing symptoms of a TI, which have become much worse over the following years. Since then, I have been trying very hard to help her in her perpetual misery. As a carer, it is very difficult. Introduction to TIs. For those who may not be familiar with the science, targeted individuals are those people who are constantly being bombarded with various forms of electromagnetic waves. If we think of what we call radio waves, and that a suitable antenna or aerial can pick up these waves to such a degree that we can find a single radio station, we have an idea that these waves can be manipulated to perform other functions. I am not in a position, nor intend to, lecture on how all this works or explain this technologically. It remains only that such things as radio waves, radar and such like are possible and are real and work to our eventual detriment. For sure, of whatever these waves comprise, they can be used to target an individual much as you might receive a telephone call on a telephone. The signals a TI receives, however, they are felt, are like 24/7 365 cold calls, unwanted and unwarranted nuisance calls, but that defy switching off. Worldwide targeting. It is essential to realise that the targeting of individuals is a worldwide action. It knows no bounds, since the experiments carried out are those which affect everybody. It is again essential that all I am saying here needs to be repeated in languages other than English. How else are we to appreciate the values of others to our contribution of a data field which we can share with other humanities and learn from? A definition of TI. A TI is an innocent person who is subjected to constant harassment which may or may not be never-ending. There are different types of harassment. These may be singularly used or used together. Whatever the method used to target someone, they all emanate in the body from a single complex source, the brain. The brain directs everything in the body. That's its job. If you crack your toe on something, the signal, we call it electric, travels instantly to the brain and instantly produces a feeling of pain in the toe. It is nature's way of a survival from a potential threat. There have been hundreds of experiments on fauna, including humans of course, over the years to map the brain. The perpetrators of these experiments have been able to perform this task. With increasing abilities, with what is called technology, they are able to trigger all sorts of events. You can research these for yourself, if you are not aware of them already. Various forms of electronic weapons are readily available to those with the means to produce them and use them. V2K, Voice to skull is a method, however achieved, that is able to target the voice centres of the brain and create voices which are not yours. It can become very complex. V2K sufferers will understand what I am saying from their own experiences. This is a fact, not a fiction or imagination. Directed energy weapons. These are known and admitted to be used for crowd control and may be used in various guises to be directed at a single person. Microwave or wireless pollution. With the advent of the so-called microchip, and especially the advent of the mobile telephone, in my view an abomination for many reasons, and which is why I've never had a reason to acquire one, the planet Earth and the Earth itself is now bathed in electromagnetic waves that are unknown to nature in their human present incarnations as communication weapons for positive or negative uses. They are part of tracking technology, also part of facial recognition technologies peddled as security measures. Our misuse of these technologies will undoubtedly be the means by which humans will finally demise and leave the planet in a prior state. Electromagnetic microwave torture. Even if a TI can find a way to help alleviate V2K, the use of weapons to disrupt the brain's normal patterns of behaviour to survive is made far worse by the interference from those new normal brain functions. Since this happens, this is reflected in aberrations of perfectly normal behaviours from perfectly otherwise healthy individuals. It must be a fact. It is a fact to the recipient and carer who knows the individual. I refuse to believe otherwise. It will be inhuman of me. That these forms of torture are crimes is irrelevant. The torture continues interminably. Gang stalking, the method by which apparently that a number of persons are able to track and follow a subject and perform their tortures upon the unsuspecting victims, or are unable to contact whoever is handling them. This is known to be perfectly correct, although very difficult to prove. Problems of getting others to accept the notion of being a targeted individual. When Spielberg used "We Are Not Alone" for the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind, it would describe a TI perfectly, but it will be rendered as "I am not alone in my head." Voices in the head, other than one's own permanent dialogue with oneself, which is perfectly natural for the human creature for survival, otherwise he wouldn't do it, was a sure way to presume someone was mentally ill. There must be many ways and reasons for the phenomenon of the internal dialogue, but no one really understands it, and certainly not psychiatrists or psychologists who have their own agenda. It may be a means by some people to come to terms with their situations, and that must be done on a personal level without recourse to some pseudo-scientific inquiry, at least in my view. In terms of TIs, the voices are generated by outside means from their bodies and the technology, whatever that is capable of doing so. The technology is there, that of which there is no doubt. It can put voices in your head, and it does. Getting help. It is very easy to get defeatist when trying to find help. However, we must not become despondent. If there is a plan, we must not become part of it by giving up. We must realise that it is the system, establishment, or whatever by which we are led to believe in, that is the progenitor of the crimes of harassment, whatever they might take, in whatever form. Therefore, the obvious methods of trying to do something will always fall on deaf ears, even if some of those ears are not totally devoid of functioning correctly. Even good cops or MPs are part of the system that we have allowed to take control of lives to which they insist we belong. First ports of call are usually the police, so-called doctors, MPs or other self-constructed authorities and so forth. All these and their various organisations such as NATO, WHO, are part of the establishment to rule others for their own ends, not yours. Your own particular authorities are all connected, however you might wish to believe otherwise. In a word, they are all useless as institutions and have no interest in your welfare. Failure to realise this is paramount to your well-being. Ranters like David Icke, no denigration to the man, are all part of the system. They offer nothing but a rant with no practical help whatsoever. Of what is called the mainstream, in my view the main sewer, acceptance, there is no help either, because it is also part of the establishment. No luck there. None. So what are strategies to counter these forms of harassment? Firstly, I must say that I am not denigrating any of the following, because any of them may work to some degree or none, as we are all different. Shielding. The usual forms of protection are to counter the incoming signals. These usually result in the expense of shielding. Like almost all, I imagine, Sally has spent a great deal of money on all sorts of materials with all sorts of contraptions to ground them and so forth. Few, if any, give a moment's respite. A lot of people are happy to take your money for these products, offering pseudo-scientific reasons why they work. Some may work to a degree for you, others may not. It is absolutely essential that you are aware that the microwaves, or whatever, are three-dimensional, like radio waves to your wireless. To be shielded by a completely sealed steel box, for example, you might be safe from the assault on you, but it would expire as soon as your lungs gave out devoid of oxygen. Magnets. Many people have tried configurations of magnets and such like. I have not endeavoured to find anyone who has had success. Personally, I haven't had any success with magnets, and I am pretty inventive. Q-wave and other such devices. Yes, I invested in such a device. I learned my lesson. Getting Sally drunk on a cheap bottle of wine might have had a better effect. Be warned. Seeking medical advice. Doctors have little clue about anything. Nowadays they will only refer you to a pill or a psychiatric. Getting together and getting the word out. Websites. Given the plethora of websites on the internet relating to TIs, one should be very wary, however they appear. It is quite easy to produce a marvellous website that is not legitimate. This applied somewhat to YouTube and what I call antisocial web activities like Facebook and Twitter. I admit that all these sites, less so perhaps YouTube, have their uses. I am merely saying, beware with whom you correspond. As a carer, I have written to a number of organisational websites with ideas but never had a reply. A number of them are no longer functional anyway. Spurious alleged victims. Following on from what I have just said, one should be very wary of some characters possibly posing as TIs. It may be very difficult to spot such characters, but if they are pushing a certain item or product, it is a possible clue. You are being deceived. You are constantly being deceived, not only by the situations that the perpetrators of harassment, but so-called and self-named authorities. They are certainly not in your best interests. Therefore, avoid mainstream views, news, or about almost anything, such as medications, vaccinations, germs, psychiatry and other things. Wars, alleged events outside your knowledge or verification. Real or unreal, one doesn't need the stories. Again, avoid getting too involved with what I call antisocial websites. There is no doubt that Facebook or Twitter have their value. However, it is evident that these sites and others are manufactured by the very same perpetrators of the crimes they inflict upon you. They were not the construction of a single entity, but by those who deem to control. They are not therefore theories of a conspiracy, they are a truth. There is no person, in my view, of the entity called Mark Zuckerberg, Sugar Mountain. He is a creation of the CIA, MI5 or 6 or whatever. Entities such as Edward Snowden, highest mountain in Wales, is a computer graphic construction. They are owned and created by the perpetrators of the crimes which TIs are subjected. Possible solutions, not in any order. Badges. Sally likes the idea of badges. There are any number on the internet, but many folks wear badges for identification purposes and are ignored by the average person. In my view, badges need not have writing on them except for perhaps TI. They need not all be the same shape and could be readily made at home. They do not even need to be round or square, but must be something like a high colour, brightish or lime green. The colour must be agreed by the wearers. Size would be in the order of 4 centimetres. I believe that homemade badges carry more weight than manufactured ones, but I stand to be corrected. Ideas welcome. The psychology behind this notion is that these badges will be noticed by others who may, hopefully, be intrigued enough to investigate if enough of them are seen, especially in high concentrations of the public. They might persuade someone to ask what a TI is, and the answer would be, I am a targeted individual. If the response is, what is that? The best answer would be, I can't tell you. You will have to find out for yourself. Demonstrations. Say no to most demonstrations. Follow a more logical approach as you go about your business. Simply wearing, for example, a bright green piece of apparel, as in the yellow vests which had considerable success in France, would suffice that people might ask questions. Crowd behaviour. The psychology of the crowd is well known, as are methods by which they are disrupted. It is my belief that mass demonstrations do not really work, and they can lead to unwanted violence, often caused by infiltrators. Also, joining large groups which come and go is not the answer. However they call themselves organisations or international, it cuts no ice with the criminals. Mandated areas for protesters are a complete waste of resources and will only label protesters as kooks by any mainstream news services. Be warned. Writing to officials. This is another action that needs to be better thought out. A single letter to any one organisation that pretends to care for the public or an official site deemed to be responsible is of little use. I have contacted so-called officials many times at cost of sending legitimate literature. It was worth nothing. You may only get a plausible denial of some kind in return, if you get one at all. This needs to be a coordinated effort to flood these establishments or personnel with personal, so far as you wish to go, letters, but not all at once. I believe that petitions variously have little use also, but am certainly not condemning anything that may work. Plausible denial refers to the notion that electronic harassment in all its forms is not happening. The perpetrators know that what they are doing is not verifiable in terms that could be brought to a court of justice and prosecuted. Justice is part of the system by which controllers of guilty behaviours are firmly in control. Courts, the police and so forth require physical evidence of misdemeanours. Their methods most often reflect this, as what the perpetrators of these crimes are doing provides little, if any, outward signs of what they can achieve. The so-called authorities are able to shove their false notions of disease, mental problems and such like under your nose and claim what they like about the subsequent behaviours with which they have inflicted upon you without turning a hair. Needed, a database of case strategies. From a case study, one could extract any strategies that people have found that work for them, don't work for them, need looking into, or might otherwise be useful. Again, we are looking for patterns. Personal behaviours. So far as I see it, as a carer, I am amazed how Sally copes minute by minute, day by day. However, she does as far as possible and in her own way, as listeners, readers of this might attest. Such data from others might be a help. I refuse to give advice as my knowledge is limited and I have no right to invade. I can, however, as a healthy person in my 70s, make a few comments. They are yours to take or leave. Some have already been said. Diet and well-being. Here I will state the perfectly obvious. I am not expounding any form of diet. Your diet is your choice. Having said that, and in my view, I will make certain suggestions, without prejudice, as to what may be best achieved. No diet, ingestion of food, is sacrosanct to the planet as a whole. We all live in different locations, and no size fits all, as they say. Common sense, therefore, prevails. All I would want to say is that our diets should contain as natural foods as possible and prepared by conventional means. No microwave heating, for example. Sunlight is essential. There are no good or bad, what are called UV waves, only that exposure is how you want it to be to remain comfortable. All sunlight methods, sunglasses, magic potions, zinc and so forth, are not natural and can cause more harm than good. Be aware of fake claims otherwise. The skin is the largest organ of the body and requires space to breathe. Covering it unnecessarily is asking for trouble. Medications. At best, medications should be avoided as far as possible and personal research into them vital. A doctor would rarely explain what is in the pills, injections one might receive. You must use them with considerable care and always ask for specific details. As a side note, medicines do not have side effects. This is a ploy for doctors to tell you that they work, or might not work if you are lucky, but these have side effects. Medicines have effects, pure and simple. In any sort of pain, it is perfectly natural to seek a healing aid, of that there is no doubt. Caution is always essential. Be very aware of any talk of doctors, psychiatrists or psychologists. They are all part of the system that is causing the problem. A carer's view. A carer, in the case of TIs especially, is very important. I imagine that they may be very difficult to find. A carer must be able to understand that you are going through your life with something they won't be aware of, since it won't be happening to them. Understanding is a gift, especially when the subject of electronic harassment is not mainstream, yet. Being a carer is very difficult because one must be elevated above the poor you. Oh, I'm so sorry. When you love someone, it can be worse, and carers must keep themselves healthy in thought and body. A listening skill, mostly without retort, is essential. Whatever is happening is happening. It cannot be questioned by those to whom it is not happening. Carers should be aware that a TI may exhibit actions that would not be part of their lives if they were not tormented constantly, like cursing or other behaviours. These must be considered in the context of their torment. TIs are not invalids. They are people with an ongoing personality which is being invaded by the unwanted. The perpetrators are the ones to be pitied and in jail, not the victims. Lost in the mire. TIs are a special people. They must not feel alone. It is all very well to talk of groups of this kind or that. A great many people will not be able to find a group. They do not live in towns or cities. They may not be, or want to be, social at that level. Afterwards. I have endeavoured to cover a number of issues in this lecture. I have also endeavoured to remain as positive as possible without going into all the political, military issues. At the stage we are at present, it is only the individuals who are important. Finally, given the effort put into this work, as long as my name is appended, this lecture may be freely distributed in total. It may only be quoted with due deference and link to the complete work. Please respect. Bless you and be well.